Good morning. Welcome to Sales Chatter. Before we even get started, today is International Women's Day. It's something that both Jeff and I take really seriously. It's a day to sit back, reflect, and highlight the progression and the status of basically made towards gender equality. For those who don't know, this basically started in 1908, where 15,000 strong women marched through New York City. They want to fight for equal pay, for shorter hours, and as well to have voting rights. To us, right now, we take these things for granted. We don't know the struggles that women have made over the history of our years, and they still continue to make that struggle for us. But with things like Jeff and I doing sales chatter, empowering women into logistics, we want to make that message known and make it highlighted and not forget about it. It's something that is truly important to us. So we're going to hit the intro today. We're going to have a fun show, but we definitely need to highlight this, not just today, but let's do this every day.
Every day.
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
So welcome to the Sales Chatter, the logistics podcast, where we aim to help 10,000 reps hit a million GP. I'm your co-host, Ryan Mohammed. With me is my good friend, the Bodacious Cowboy, President and CEO of RGTX Logistics Solutions, Jeff Dickinson. How you doing this morning, brother?
Great, my man. Today, like you mentioned, is International Women's Day, and we celebrate all the wins and successes that they've had over the years. And as you and I both know, have we gotten better? Yes, but are we where we need to be today? And I still say no. We still have a lot of things to cover. When we talk about empowering women into logistics and to keep that momentum going, not just over our show, but just to keep it going and keep people appraised of what's going on and working with these great women out there to get that word out. It's so important.
That's amazing. And, it's something that, like we said, we need to highlight this more, and we're just going to continue to do our path, or what we're chosen to do. But it is Data Day, you got International Women's Day, but we got our good friend. So we want to welcome this morning from Denver, live from Denver. I think it's like what, like it's like 8 o'clock or 10. Like he's showing up this morning. So good morning, Dean.
9
So
a.m.
happy to have you. 9 a.m. So welcome to the show.
Yeah.
So happy to have you, Dean. How you doing?
Good. Yeah, good to be with you. It's pretty cold out here, but I've got a beautiful view of the Rocky Mountains with lots of snow on them. My son's out there skiing somewhere, having the time of his life with his buddies.
Nice.
Envious.
How's the weather out there? What are you seeing?
It's cold. Yeah, it's cold and blustery here. It's about 30 degrees. But it's going to be sunny out on the hills, so I think it'd be a good day for skiing if anybody's thinking about venturing out to Aspen or Breckenridge. There's some beautiful skiing out there. I've only been there once. I had a yard sale under a quad chair. That's a whole other story about Australian skiing in the US. We don't have any snow, so
unbelievable. But you know what? That's a great segue to talk about all the weather mishaps that the West Coast is happening in the market and its impact. What's going on? Talk to me.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some unprecedented weather. And if you caught our show yesterday, we had Cody Kohler on talking about the Salinas produce season. Of course, it's the summer salad bowl, which is distinct from the winter salad bowl in Yuma, Arizona. But, we've had terrific floods in California, lots of water, way too much water. But what I thought that would delay produce season. What he told me was a little bit surprising, and that was the cold weather has really killed off a lot of the seedlings. So it'll, the weather has sort of been extreme at this time of the year on the West Coast. We saw the effects of it across most of the West Coast in terms of spot rate movement. Capacity was tight because trucks obviously slow down. It was also evident all the way across the prairies. When you look at where the weather track occurred, hardest hit regions like Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, rates are up 14 cents a mile across those blizzard hit areas. One of the data points that stuck in my mind was a YouTube video of a bull hauler. So he's clearly empty, but the trailer was going along at 45 degrees to the tractor. So he's being blown. There's a blizzard, and you could tell it's a bull hauler because of all the chicken lights all over.
Was this on Route 80? Was this on Route 80?
Yeah. and he's going along, and the trailer's just sort of sliding along at 45 degrees to the truck. It's some serious weather out there, but the bull haulers are a whole nother breed under their own. So the data point though from the weather, yes, there was a big effect of it across the areas that were hardest hit by the snow. California rates are up about 5 cents a mile, which is a data point that's interesting because rates have been dropping on the West Coast there. A lot of the gains were in Los Angeles and Ontario. So yes, weather played a big role, even on the Pacific Northwest, where they've had some of the biggest snowstorms. Spot market volume surged last week. They're up 48%. So it's a number of loads trying to be moved on the spot market because of the weather conditions. Mostly rates are up 9 cents a mile to average of $1.84 for refrigerated carriers. That's pretty good for carriers out of the Pacific Northwest. Oregon, of course, is one of our biggest spot markets. Rates are up to about $1.87 there. So yeah, lots of impact of weather last week. We didn't see it the week before, but the extreme weather that we're seeing at the moment is hard to comprehend. You see data points like 40 feet of snow in Northern California, and then you follow guys on Instagram that are being shut down for 2 or 3 days at a time. These are pretty severe times for the truckers that are out there. I feel for them because a lot of them are totally unprepared for this.
What's the impact of delay and the disruption from these snowstorms, especially in the upper Northwest? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we just see capacity tighten because the velocity of the trucks through the freight network just slow down to a crawl. It's exactly what happened during the polar vortex. So the polar vortex in just over 2 years ago, that was a 10% hit to capacity. We lost 10% capacity in that week because it was locked up. It just couldn't move. And what you find is drivers run out of hours really quickly. If they're crawling along interstates, I think there's just service failures everywhere in your world, Jeff, and the shipper side. There's just lots of service failures and delays. The flip side is, it depends what you're hauling. I guess a lot of shippers would be probably happy for it to sit in a truck for a week because they've got nowhere to put it in a warehouse. I mean, that's a sweeping statement, but the same applies to a lot of shippers that are moving freight on intermodal right now. They are more than happy for that freight to sit in a 53-foot intermodal box while they're finding space for that next season's inventory.
Yeah, to extend their supply chain for a few days, if they can, not all can do that, because of the terms that they have on a monthly basis, can go another 2 or 3 days. But that's what you're going to get, and let's just make a point that even though the disruptions are over the road, rail intermodal moves have disruptions as well. You've got couples that get frozen. There's things that happen on the rail. A lot of people do not know. The railmen also are on HOS, hours of service, as well. So when they have downtime and that train doesn't move, they're still on a schedule and they can only work the amount of hours that they need to. So, don't forget that. Even though that the supply chain will increase as far as transit times, maybe 2 or 3 days, it might be more than that because of that.
And the positive side of the warmer weather that we've had in the Pacific, in the Northeast, Jeff, we've had a little bit of cold recently, but not that blistering cold that sort of shuts everything down. And we've had a really warm winter. Like it's been wet. We've had, my neighbour's ice rink that he built. It's about a 2 feet pond. It's frozen once. Normally you'd see a good backyard rink going on for, quite a while. The reason I mention that is, I spend a lot of time on the highways and just watching. There's a lot of freight moving. I'm seeing, things like palm trees. You might say, well, what the heck are palm trees got to do with anything? Well, you got to plant them in the ground. You got to dig a hole. And it means spring's on the way. If you look at all the flatbeds to me are like taking the pulse of the freight industry. Because when you sit and watch flatbeds, you see garden mulch in sort of 50-pound bags moving. You see fire hydrants. You see light poles. You see tractors. You see the industrial economy moving. And on the I-95 corridor up north of between you and I, Jeff, in January, I was seeing a lot of things move that needed a hole dug. And I say, well, what the heck does that mean? Well, normally the ground's frozen solid. You can't dig a hole. I think I mentioned on the show a few weeks ago, my snowplow markers on my driveway had all fallen over. They just won't stand up. The ground's too soft. So We got a rock star cast of people diving into the comment section
Yes.
this morning. This could be a good show.
Yes.
So anyway, so weather's having a big impact, right? Your point about capacity, the miles are incredibly hard for drivers. They just get harder and harder. The conditions are tougher, especially for flatbed carriers, right? They get a really hard go of it when you get north of I-40. You get into those colder temps, or your binders freeze. Your tarps crack. Things just break. I was watching a guy just tighten his chains in the fuel island on the I-40 in Knoxville last week, and he's obviously never had a binder bar break on him when he's been putting his whole body weight to tighten the strap. But he wasn't holding the rail of the trailer.
Yep.
He was just jumping on it with both hands. And I thought, dude, you're going to lose your teeth one day, because what happens is stuff breaks in cold weather. And if you don't hold one hand on the rail of the trailer and the other hand as you push down, when it breaks, you're just going to headbutt the railing. And I speak from experience, as you can see from my appearance. I've had more than my fair share of scrapes with the side of a trailer. But winter weather is really tough. Seriously, things break. Things just break, and equipment failure is high. You get a lot of trucks breaking down because they're diesel gels. You get to that cold point where you get ice in your fuel filters. Your trucks won't start. A lot of large fleets just keep their trucks idling. They never let the drivers shut them down. So you go into truck stops, you'll see a lot of large fleets just idling away, because the cost of idling is far less than the cost of a truck with frozen fuel filters and an engine and a gelled up fuel tank.
But you won't find that in New Jersey with the no idle laws that they have.
Oh, California.
Yeah. So, I mean, but thank God, to your point, Dean, that it has been a pretty warm winter out here in the Northeast. So we don't really need to worry about those diesel fuel freezing up and all that kind of stuff that you mentioned.
Right. Yeah, so that's the weather story. There's lots going on in the freight market, though. We're in that sort of this is sort of it's like in that period after sports season sort of ends in summer. What do they call it? The dog days of summer. That period where there's nothing happening. It's a bit like that it's a bit like that in the freight market. We're at the start of March, and it's like really, really quiet. I watched a video of a guy at the Port of New York and New Jersey yesterday on TikTok, and which is my go-to data point for what's going on in the trucking industry. Many will laugh at that, but you really do get a good insight because you can see what's going on. And he was at the Port of New York and New Jersey on Friday afternoon, last Friday, and every single crane, ship-to-shore crane, was up in the air. They weren't unloading a single ship. And if you read the comments, it's interesting. Some of the longshoremen say, we've never seen it this quiet. Never. In 20 years, we have never seen that imports at such a low level. And of course, people are saying, well, it's normally, just after Chinese New Year, volumes drop. And of course, this is this whiplash effect from all the surging imports last year to now where volumes are really low. But the fact that all of the ship-to-shore cranes all along that Hudson River were up in the air, and you could see them in the background. They were up in the air. They just don't magically fly up just for a video shoot. They weren't working, and a Friday afternoon, normally things are pumping there. Lots of, and there's some other data points we can share if you want to jump into that from the Journal of Commerce TPM 23 conference last week.
Go ahead.
I was talking to Ari Ash last week, and this is, for those listening, this has been this theme we've been talking about for 18 months now about the imports and the impact it's been having on the freight market and all the supply chains. And I shared with you guys a data point that sort of showed from a visual inspection of the ports what things were like out there. We know that import volumes are down. We report that. But some of the, and I'll read them to you for the listeners. This is from someone who drove around the ports and had a look last week during this big, international shipping conference. Empty 53-foot boxes stacked all over the place. 40-foot international boxes stacked on port property in many places. No chassis shortage. Plenty of them around. Older ones are being scrapped. Yes, that makes sense. Empty well cars, empty containers. Eastbound trains, including racks of empty well cars. Empty well cars is unusual because a well car is where you double stack two 53s, right? So you need a well car. That hurts. And the other data points where I'll just quickly go. much less container traffic, no queues to enter port terminals, and drayage carriers actively scouting for business. I talked to Ari Ash yesterday, who's writing an article in the Journal of Commerce about this very thing. If you subscribe to Journal of Commerce, you'll see an article coming up where we interviewed with him, because we're seeing freight volumes way down on the West Coast as a result of the slowing imports. But he talked to one carrier and said that he was looking at his lot, or I'm not sure what you call it, where you stack all your containers. And so a year ago, he had no space. There were no slots to stack containers, and they had them 6, 7 high. This year, the whole lot was completely empty. So, and when he went across all the terminals, it was a similar story. So we're in this sort of, dog days of winter, if I can call it that, where things are just really, really quiet, and it's hurting some carriers. You would have read yesterday there was a 140 truckload carrier went out of business yesterday, or went out last week. That hurts. And yes, and I've got a couple of hats. I've been on their podcast. It's really sad news. Yep, absolutely. So this is sort of what happens, as Nerf says. Current rates are giving me ice in my veins. Well,
he's right.
What happens when shippers drive down rates and cut volumes is some carriers have got sort of fixed costs that they've got to meet, and just becomes unsustainable. And I'm not sure what happened with the good people at FreightWorks, but you can see that happening with a lot of the rates in the market. Contract rates are dropping. The active rates coming in the active rates in routing guides are down about 1% in the last 2 weeks, but the new rates coming in are down about 9%. So, and we've been reporting that since November, that new rates based on RFPs on contract are coming down. And of course, you've got the spot rates on the other side of the market, which is about 10% of the market. Those rates are about 90 cents a mile lower than this time last year, but slightly higher than where you'd normally be for week 8. So we're here in Denver with all of our top brokers and for our customer advisory board meeting, and the one thing that came across from all of them is they're seeing more contract volume going direct to you guys, non-asset logistics experts. So that's our data point we've been sharing for a long time, which is that shippers have been strategically putting more volume direct to non-asset brokers and logistics professionals to move freight, as opposed to putting it out to contract carriers who may or may not move it.
And know something? Know something? Remember, we were talking about the RFPs, and I just put an article back out there, and we shared that. The sustainability of an annual RFP is not there. Simply to your point, I mean, you can't hold these rates forever, and they're going to have to be reviewed again within the quarter, if not sooner. And changes are going to have to be made, because the carriers cannot sustain those kind of rates over a long period of time. And the good people out there who do the RFPs will have that constructive conversations with their shippers and their carriers when the market changes. You have to bring them up to speed and give them the reason why. Is there a justification? There sure is, and there will be. It's coming. We don't know if it's going to be sooner or later right now, based upon your report that you shared, Dean, the other day. We saw that little bounce in there, and have we hit the bottom? I don't know. I mean, it's going to be a few more weeks before we're able to say yay or nay, so.
Yeah, I wrote in my weekly report that was out last night that the market is clearly searching for a bottom, not a bottom, the bottom, to be more precise, the bottom in the market. And they've been, if you look at our 7-day rolling average, they've been bouncing around at about $1.75 a mile. That's excluding fuel, which, some people are saying, how long can carriers sustain those rates? If you own your own equipment, you can get by on $1.75 a mile as a national average. Can't do it for too long because you're not building up enough equity or profit to pay for engine rebuilds or buying new trucks down the line. So we are seeing the bottom of the market appear. Our Radcast 35-day forecast has still got rates moving down about 5 cents a mile over the next 4 weeks. So we are, if you think about where we've started a year ago, we have, the rates have accelerated downwards. They seem to be bottoming out, And we've always contended that they would bottom out about where it costs to run, sort of the lowest common denominator, that long haul truck. That's where your highest operating costs. Interestingly, guys, I did my numbers yesterday. Diesel's down to 428, a long way south of 580, which is what it was in June last year. The cost to run a truck are slightly lower this week than they were a year ago, which again will sound counterintuitive. It was $2.03 when we were talking about it last year. It's down to $1.90 a mile today. Diesel was 78 cents a mile last year. It's 66 cents a mile today. So when you think about where rates are at, and I did the modeling on it yesterday, if you think about rates at $1.75, and you say, how would a carrier survive? Well, my $1.90 a mile includes paying yourself 60 cents a mile wage, 70 grand a year, fair wage. You're not generating a lot of profit, but to break even, you just pay yourself 50 cents a mile, right? So people say, how are carriers getting by on this? When you're buying capacity, one of the ways they're getting by is they're paying themselves less money, which is not sustainable longer term because you're not generating a return on the equity that's already in your truck, and you're not generating, more importantly, for these new fleet entrants to the industry who have purchased an overpriced used truck that's out of warranty. You are not generating enough cash to pay 30 grand for an out-of-frame rebuild on an engine with more emission stuff on it than you can imagine. And so you're talking about capacity exiting the industry before it sort of reaches equilibrium. It's a lot of those carriers that are on the margins. You're talking about fairly small numbers, but each carrier that goes out of business is not a good event because that's a business failure. But we're still in that phase, so we're still losing capacity. Some of those longer haul carriers are still exiting, even though diesel prices are coming down. So we're at this really interesting inflection point in the market. Spot rates appear to be finding a bottom, and I think I agree, Jeff, they're not quite there yet. Last week we had a little bit of a bump because of end of month shipping, so that created a bit of a surge. This week's data that ends on Saturday night, when I look at it Sunday, I'll know if that sort of increase was sustained and we're off to the races. I tend to think we're not. I think that might have just been a surge, an end of month shipping surge. But the other data point is, remember, for all those thinking about rates and capacity, contract rates follow spot by 4 to 6 months. So even if spot rates bottom out in March, it'll be 6 months later before you start to see any meaningful correction on the way up in terms of contract rates. And that's why that FreightWorks announcement is interesting, because some shippers are going to aggressively play the spot market to get cheaper transport costs and their pre-negotiated contract rates. The rub there is the harder you do that, the more quickly you turn the market, because you force capacity out of the industry. So,
well, just to add to that, Dean, what I've kind of seen as well, just exactly with that point, is that in my weekly prospecting calls, like last week and even some this week, a lot of those new logistics managers, they were used to be brokers. Like they used to be on the carrier side or the brokerage side of things. And they're like, okay, it's like Jeff, right? Jeff came from the shipper side and he came over to an SME side. So they're coming in with that knowledge of what they've learned. And their goal is really to just minimize costs, essentially from last year, and kind of get caught up on those budgets. And when Jeff kind of mentioned, like RFPs, you can't do them for a year. I've seen the big 800-pound gorillas. They'll always keep those yearly because everybody wants to work with them, right? But I'm finding the mid-size to smaller ones, it's either quarter or 6 months RFPs that they're doing. So I think coming back to that point, you're having experienced people. It's just like if Jeff and I were to go into a shipper's role, and okay, what changes would we make? What have we learned, and how can we better maximize that?
Right. I did some modeling yesterday, because one of the questions was, well, what rates do carriers need to be profitable? We'd need to see spot rates up around $2.40 a mile, including fuel, right? So all-in rates at around $2.40 a mile. We're not there yet. We're at about $2.22, I think, including fuel. So I think Nerf's spot on. It'll be Q2 before we see a normal market. Normally what happens in this phase of the market where, capacity starts to loosen.
Wait a second, Q2 of 2024?
Oh, sorry, 2023. Holy crap. What's he? That's so way. That's too far out. No, I thought it was 23. Yeah, no. Quarter two.
Well, so
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I can see the logic in that, but no, we're seeing that our rates are telling us the market is going to turn in Q2 of this year. What Nerf's, I think Nerf might be talking, maybe you can jump into the comments. They're talking about the demand side of the business returning to normal. I would think that's very, very accurate because we're going to have a very flat freight market this year. I think
Well,
that's
when you look into predictability, you were talking about the inter-month shipping, and I know this as a fact. It always starts going up. Now, if you look at historical information over the last several months and looking at that peak shipping period and how much that it went up, regardless of what the rates are, you would see goes up at about 3%, maybe 5%, on the 30th or 31st because they're trying to meet sales objectives and goals in the month.
Right.
Have you dug into that to see like the constant of what that predictability is every single month?
On the rate side, so when we go out and do 35-day short-term forecasts, our 14-day number is about 97% accurate. So if I say to you today, rate view is going to be $4.20 a mile on this lane in 14 days, 97% of the time we're dead right. Once you get out beyond that, it gets a little bit difficult to, it kind of widens, your path of accuracy kind of widens. Yuma, Nerf's funny. You should read this, Ryan. We're going to have to buy him lunch. DoorDash it to me. Oh, so yeah, I think our long-term. So Jeff, it's interesting. We did a long-term forecast yesterday on our on the show before the week before, and when you look at where rates are forecast out 52 weeks, you're certainly not seeing 2019 rates.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Even at the low points. That's because it's costing all carriers a lot more to run their trucks these days than it was before. So I think our long-term forecast, we do have, and I'd love to be able to pull this up here for you quickly. But I'm not
the quarter predictability, you do the month over month, year over year, as far as peak shipping at the end of each month. Then you look at quarter results because where they fail to meet the requirements of month one, month two, they can kind of play catch up, and they're like, okay, guys, come on, let's try to meet the quarter goals and objectives. So there's more emphasis on shipping. I mean, I've seen it over my career, and I'm just curious if it's dynamic or static or what.
No, it's very dynamic, Jeff. We run those long-term forecasts every month, and I've got them pulled up here now. I'm looking at our sort of forecast, which is a dotted blue line here. When I look at the low points, it's forecasting in a low point here, and it's still higher than all of 2019 or higher than 2016, the last two sort of freight recessionary type years. So that's part of why you will have seen when you're buying capacity, large carriers being more price disciplined this time around. Diesel's up, 25 cents a mile. It's added about 25 cents a mile to the cost of operating a truck. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think, remember on the show here, I told you about an RFP meeting that I was in where I got beaten up pretty badly by the truckload carriers because I said, contract rates are coming down, and they said, heck no, it's costing us a lot more to pay our drivers, and we can't claw that back. It's costing us a lot more to buy our trucks. It's costing us a lot more money to get, spare parts. Everything is costing us a lot more money.
I mean, it is what it is. I mean, you're not going to tell them inaccurate data. I mean, even though they don't want to hear it, they have to hear it.
Yeah, it was a pretty aggressive negotiation, but 6 months on, the data point that comes out from shippers is, carriers were being very price disciplined this time around. They weren't just, lowering their rate for, as far as they could just to win the business. Different story on the intermodal side. There's a lot of intermodal capacity that's sitting, empty, idle, a lot of empty well cars running. So I think the big JB Hunt, Hub, Schneider, they're eager to fill their 53-foot containers that they purchased. Yeah. So that's why I mentioned that Los Angeles Chicago lane on our show yesterday, and I'll just pull up the numbers because this is rates are up last week to, wait for it, $1.31 a mile. it's half what it was a year ago. So when you think about the peak of the import season coming in from Asia, late 2021, early 2022, we were moving triple the volume of truckloads on that lane from Los Angeles to Chicago. Rates are half what they were back then. And when you look at a lot of lanes, whether you look at Los Angeles to Stockton, Denver, Phoenix, or Dallas, where a lot of imports move to warehouses, all of those lanes are showing rates down about half what they were this time a year ago. So, capacity has really loosened off, particularly on the West Coast. I think I'd love to get your take on this, Jeff, but it seems to me that a lot of the damage that's been done by the non-certification of the ILWU contract and the shift in freight away from the West Coast, how does that not do a lot of damage to the West Coast? And then the intermodal rail networks that have been set up to move freight from the West Coast to Chicago and Kansas City. How does it not impact that longer term?
Well, it has to, because number one, they don't have the volumes that they used to, right? I mean, it's shifted quite a bit, and we know where that inventory and those containers shifted to. So, you're going to see the uptick no matter which way you look at it, out of the East Coast and down in the Gulf area as well. But what are you going to do with these warehouses that used to be at full capacity at 98, 99%? They couldn't find any space. I'm really curious as to how much space they have available now.
Well, you heard it on this show.
What they are facing, because they built all these big, huge warehouses, and the idea, hey, we're going to be able to fill them like that. I don't think that's happening. I don't think that's happening because of the shift. I mean, when you think about the percentage that it's dropped and where it went, I mean, I can understand, a lot of the warehousing in DCs that you and I've seen down in the Houston, Dallas area that is just blowing out at the seams off of 35. Sustainability there, sure, because they have the inventory that's coming in there, a lot of it. Same on the East Coast, we see that in Savannah, we see that. I'm just really curious about that, but it's got to be affecting the intermodal coming out of.
So here's where I think that it affects all of us that are buying capacity, not me, but you guys that are buying capacity, right? You have to be thinking about, if you're the railroads, what do you do with market share? Like if you lose your market share, because they're particularly strong on loads over, 1,200, 1,500 miles. They own anything over 1,500 miles. The long haul railroads own that on intermodal. So far less.
Profitability is over 700. I mean,
so then how do you, if you lose that volume there, do you start to shift to become more aggressive on short line and, shorter haul, 400, 500 mile lanes that traditionally not profitable on the East Coast? So you think about buying capacity and you've got a commodity that can move on a train over 600 miles, you might think about an intermodal move as opposed to a truck move. If you're thinking about what's your solution for your shipper, because when you add in the lifting on and off of a container on a short haul, it's always sort of outweighs both time and cost against a truck. And this is how I think we all need to be thinking about this, because that's what that West Coast thing means, is it's going to change how freight moves on the East Coast. Now, the railroads haven't indicated they're going to become very aggressive and competitive on short haul. But to me, it seems to be a logical extension.
I'd like to see that, because I would think, when I was working for Schneider Intermodal, they used to be talking about that all the time and doing the strategic planning and the tactics and everything like that, and repositioning their cans wherever they needed to, right? But right now, it's a difficult situation. I mean, you can see it. You can see it blooming. It's happening. And I'm just curious what, behind closed doors, what they're talking about. I used to, I mean, I don't have that ability to see behind closed doors, but I bet you they are talking about that, and whether or not they want to take a hit, and whether or not it's sustainable to create enough profit for them to continue doing it.
Yeah, I think this is a real inflection point for the Class 1s, on the intermodal side, because that's where truckload competes the heaviest on the long haul. We kind of own the short haul space because of our, flexibility and speed of moving freight.
You're looking at carbon footprint too, right?
Yeah.
CO2 and being able to write that off if you have the government incentives, or if you know about that, you can and you can decrease your
Yep.
carbon footprint.
Yep.
Is it there? Or are they
Yep.
still reaching those percentages that they used to when the market was
Right.
hot and moving a ton over intermodal?
Right.
You said it before. Intermodal's got a lot of cans and looking for
Yeah. Right.
some people to start switching over and taking OTR over to IMDL and
Yep. And Jeff, there's
different
I
areas.
think it'll be commodity specific, right? So if you've got a commodity that's just replenishment, it's not time sensitive, throw it in a 53-foot box. Let it sit. Let it take 2 weeks to get somewhere.
Fast movers on it. I'll tell you that right now.
Right. So for everyone listening, I think they're good things to watch. That's what some of these trends are showing, is that there's definitely a restructuring of how assets are allocated on the east coast of the country in particular. It's a trend that we're watching very closely.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It's awesome to kind of see. And yeah, I kind of actually want to get into this because we've been seeing an influx of flatbed projects come through to us in terms of like for housing, doing actually one we're actually working on right now is actually for a water park in Montreal that we're kind of putting together. But I know that I know Canada's domestic rates have kind of relatively always been the same. It's relatively around that like $3 per mile. That's the way I was kind of trained, and it's been that same way since 2016 for me. But I know that you've talked about the influx in domestic US. Like I don't touch domestic US. I know Jeff might touch it as well, but it's just so a little bit unstable. Can you talk a little bit about the flatbed market in the US?
Yeah, flatbed is obviously there's a lot of seasonal factors. If you look at our rate forecast now, you can see seasonality kicking in incredibly strongly into our forecast. They're all of our forecasts are very much in agreement because you've got spring. So now is late winter is when a lot of flatbed freight gets positioned into markets for when people start building stuff. So that's why March is the peak in steel tonnage nationally each year. It's the peak in imports of machinery into Baltimore and Houston, for example. It's usually when a lot of building activity starts in the commercial and residential space. So we see a lot of, in flatbed, we see a lot of regional differences across the market. So one of the biggest areas where single family homes are built and steel is produced is the Southeast. So the Southeast region of the US is very, very different in terms of flatbed to, say, the upper Midwest. But we're seeing rates up 9 cents a mile last week. So if you think about the national average is like $2.05, excluding fuel. If you're in the Southeast, it's $2.50 a mile. That's the average. Now, a lot of that's going to be 400 to 600 mile moves. It's incredibly profitable to run really short haul lanes from like Montgomery into Atlanta and back. You empty one way. Carriers make pretty good money on those lanes. Capacity is generally fairly tight on those dedicated lanes. So we're seeing, a lot of activity in Texas. Houston's our largest flatbed market. Rates are up to $2.32 a mile, like about 30 cents a mile higher than the national average. Houston to New Orleans is a very busy lane, $2.40 a mile. We're heading into peak machinery season out of Baltimore. A lot of imports come in from Asia and Europe into Baltimore. It's the largest roll-on, roll-off port. We're seeing volumes up about 30% last week, tight capacity. And remember, when I say flatbed, this could be a drop deck with ramps, could be a drop deck just that you drive a tractor onto it, a portable ramp setup, or it could be a flatbed with a small 100 horsepower tractor or 3 or 4 of those, or 4 skid steers. So you see a variety of trailer types, but I'll just call it flatbed for the purpose of discussion. But flatbed rates out of Baltimore up for the 4th week to an average of $2.85, up almost 30 cents a mile in the last month. I did have a look at loads from I saw a lot of loads on our load board, Ryan, going to London, Ontario. Flatbed loads out of Baltimore. I've got no idea what's in London, Ontario that would be the case because that's on the border.
Yeah.
Rates are $2.52 a mile, and they've been that's about still about $1.50 a mile lower than last year. So the other data point I looked at out of Baltimore was loads out to the Midwest, where a lot of our big, Caterpillar, John Deere machinery plants are. Baltimore to Bloomington, Illinois, $2.71. That's the highest since last April. Decatur, Illinois, $2.51. That's the highest since August. So to your point, Ryan, flatbed is very, very different in the US, and it's very different regionally, and it's very different seasonally. And remember, flatbeds, I call all of them flatbeds, but it could be an RGN for a heavy move, or it could be a drop deck with ramps or outriggers. But generally, this is the time of the year that flatbed carriers start to see pretty good volumes, and that's what we're seeing in our rates and our spot market activity. Now, for context, the spot market volumes are way down compared to last year, but we're seeing that seasonal effect have a big impact in flatbed. And the next time we'll see a seasonal bump on dry van and reefer will be produce season, albeit I think a little bit delayed this year. So seasonality is a big thing when it comes to the freight market, as you both know. But flatbed is one that is really, really obvious to all of us.
That's really interesting. I actually want to get to Nerf's comment here, talking about seasonality as well. And also fluctuation in new authorities. Influx of authorities floods the market with excess capacity, and lots of people don't know their cost per mile. And around super low affects everyone. So it's kind of coming down to like, hey, people are coming in, but they just don't know the business side of it. So it makes it worse for the other person. Leave a little bit on the table for the next person. And I like that you said that with flatbed, because I always kind of just say open deck, because it can be RGN, it can be all that fun stuff with permits. And that segues. Tomorrow's episode, we have Lita, who is a strictly open deck broker. And she's going to be here to give us all the information. We got a banger episode with her. But it's important to know those things, because I remember when I used to do domestic US flatbed, it would be short runs, actually within Houston. So like a 2-hour drive. Today's rate is different than tomorrow. So it's like, it's always been a little bit different in terms of how long they're going, how they're going to be there. But it definitely is a very interesting industry and equipment type to get into.
So Ryan, we're building DAT is going to have a product out soon. It'll be like a load level rate. Like, we've got a lane level rate. So if you want to know what the rate's been over the last year on a lane, we've got a pretty good national average based on loads moved. But what we're building is a rate for a shipment. It's a shipment rate on a lane. So it'll take into account lead time, dimensions, origin, destination, a few external data points. So it'll be something that'll say, this was the rate over the last year. This is what we think that rate is paying today on that lane, what it needs to pay on that lane today, for those that want to get down to that level of granularity. The problem you get into, and this gets to Nerf's point about knowing your costs, a lot of carriers make the mistake of focusing on rate per mile and not focusing on revenue per day, because this is where the rate per mile becomes immaterial if you're not getting 600-700 miles a day. Maybe you might say, well, that's way too many miles. People can't drive that many. A good friend of mine, John, did 732 miles in 10 hours and 50 minutes on Sunday from Cleveland to the Indiana border. Now, granted, it was a Sunday, but he bangs out 700 miles every single day, hauling pelletized plastic materials in a pneumatic tank. So people run those sorts of miles. But what you've got to understand is not just the rate per mile, but with ELDs, you've got to get the miles in per day. It's no good, large fleets are struggling to get 300, 400 miles a day. You need a pretty good rate per mile at those mileage rates to make good money. And that's where a lot of owner operators kind of miss the mark, because they focus on the rate per mile and not focus on the productivity, which is you need to be getting $1,200 to $1,500 a day into that balance sheet for that truck.
Yeah, and on those fleets, because I used to run a fleet for a motor company, we would have what we call blended rates that had stops and had the return as well. So it was like the milk run, where you had the hub and spoke operation, go out, stop at all your dealerships, and then come back. So, those are ideal for that type of situation, because you've got your deadhead miles being covered as well as your stops, and everything is blended in there. So
I was kind of struck by it. I had a conversation, because the conversation with John started, how are you recovering from your heart attack? And he said, dude, I just ran 700 miles yesterday. I'm on fire. And his truck speed limit of the 70. So, he's not blowing the wheels off this thing, and he was grossing 80,000 pounds. So there are guys out there that can really run the miles and make good money at these rates. I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that even if the rates are low, if you can haul, you're what I call a mile maker, you can make really good money in this industry. You've got to know where to look. Specialized equipment's very important, having the right equipment, the right experience. We talk about the doom and gloom of the industry when you read some of the media reports. Another friend of mine's a reefer carrier that averaged $4 a mile last year, just bought his second truck. He's going to put a driver in it, and he runs 48 states. So there are people out there making money, and I think this is a very good example of a bell curve distribution of profitability. You've got a lot of people in the middle that are getting by. There's some other people that are blowing the doors off it, making good money. And then on the far left of that bell curve, there's some people that are really struggling. And I think to Nerv's point, they're the folks that really don't understand their operating costs, or maybe don't understand the market sufficiently well enough because they haven't been around to know how to play it. And they are what you would call price takers in the market, and probably being taken advantage of more than they need to be. But that's the nature of this business here in the US. It's very cyclical. We have this boom and bust sort of cycle that goes on.
Very much so.
Yeah, that's the one thing, especially with I see a lot of on Instagram, like people just wanting to go get their CDL and just starting without knowing those information and getting to it. And just to Nerf's point, he has his YouTube page where he educates. He gives all his free education. I think it's called World of Logistics, and he just like educates the masses and just giving that education to people. So it's important. It's just like Jeff and I, where we're gonna be doing, if we're quoting an RFP or we're quoting out a spot quote or something like that, we got to know our costs. At the end of the day, we're not here to work for free. It's
Right.
it's the name of the game, right? So I think that's should be important. And
Everybody has to make a profit. It's like going to a customer and saying, "You think my rates are cheap? Well, I don't want to buy your television for $500. I want to buy it for $4." I mean, are you going to do it? I mean, come on. I mean, we don't do this for free. Seriously, it's unbelievable.
100%. Dean, what do you? So just kind of get into the topic here. What are you doing out this week in Colorado?
Yeah.
I'm at so we're here talking to all of our brokers. So we've got our broker customer advisory board. All of our top brokers are in telling us where we should spend our money, what sort of things we should be investing in. It's part of our, new focus of our new CEO is to figure out, listening to our customers. We always bring in our top, twice a year, we bring in our top brokers and the different brokers in different regions to take the pulse of the industry, figure out what we should be doing from a platform, a product roadmap. What sort of things do we need to be adding to our load board and freight match products? What are we doing to secure our network? And then I'm off to Omaha to speak at the Great West Casualty Conference. All the safety professionals that they ensure will be in there into Omaha on Friday, and I'll be talking about how to use ELD data to predict accident severity, along with how to predict which customers are the most profitable, which dock doors have the biggest dwell time. Believe it or not, it's all in your ELD data. It's the most richest, cleanest data set I've ever seen. Takes a little bit of horsepower to figure out all the dots on a map, but when you figure it out, when you look at dots on a map, you can actually figure out a lot of insights into what your fleets are doing. You can figure out dwell time between loads, which is a proxy for loose capacity or tight capacity. So there's a lot of really good data points in an ELD device that's most people use it just for compliance to hours of service. I think it's far more richer than that. So that'll be an hour-long discussion on Friday morning and then home late Friday night.
There
That's
you
awesome.
go.
So we want to thank you for coming out this morning. That's the theme that we always kind of tell. I personally do tell your story with data, and then you'll be able to guide that path on. So Dean, thank you so much for taking your time. I know you're busy, and spending every Wednesday with us. It's definitely a pleasure. I want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. If you found value in this, which I know you did, please like, comment, subscribe to our channel. Just give us a little bit of support. Jeff and I, we're working hard. We're bringing in guests for you during Women Empowerment, and we want to make sure that it's being fruitful. So we'll hit the replay at 2 and 6 p.m. on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. Like we said, we got Lita coming tomorrow. She's an amazing person with a ton of knowledge to educate everybody here. So, Jeff, take us home, my man.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Dean, once again for a great show. Not a lot of knowledge sharing and insight. Much appreciated. Also want to thank our sponsors, Centurion Trucking and Daman, for his support. Thank you so much. And also, if you're looking for a good agent position, hit up Daman at Centurion Trucking. 60%. I think that's a pretty good number if you want to make it. So give them a call, find out more information. I appreciate it again, guys. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow morning on Sales Chatter at 11 a.m., where we will continue our conversations of empowering women into logistics. With that said, have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow morning. The Bodacious Cowboy is out.